Social workers lead in the detection of abuse and neglect. Written by Heather Beckemeyer for Spring Social Work 302, taught by Dr. Ashley Sanders. So to get things started, we need to define what exactly abuse and neglect is. There is child abuse, which is harm or threatened harm to a child's health or welfare that occurs through non-accidental physical or mental injury, sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, or maltreatment by a parent, a legal guardian, or any other person responsible for the child's health or welfare by a teacher, a teacher's aide, or a member of the clergy. Child neglect is harm or threatened harm to a child's health or welfare by a parent, legal guardian, or any other person responsible for the child's health or welfare that occurs through either of the following: negligent treatment, including the failure to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, medical care, or education. Placing a child at an unreasonable risk to the child's health or welfare by failure of the parent, legal guardian, or other person responsible for the child's health or welfare to intervene or to eliminate that risk when the person is able to do so or has or should have knowledge to the risk. Abuse and neglect can further be divided into subcategories. With abuse, we will be splitting them today to talk about physical abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse. On the flip side, with neglect, we will also be splitting them into three different categories as well: physical neglect, emotional neglect, and educational neglect. Physical abuse is determined as the intentional use of physical force that can result in physical injury. Examples would include kicking, hitting, biting, shaking, or any other force against a person or child. With emotional abuse, it is defined as serious mental harm or means an injury to a child's mental condition or welfare that is not necessarily permanent, but results in visibly demonstrable manifestations of a substantial disorder of thought or mood that significantly impairs judgment, behavior, capacity to recognize reality, or ability to cope with ordinary demands of life. The emotional abuse can refer to behaviors that harm a child's self-worth or emotional well-being. Examples of this would be name calling, shaming your child both privately and publicly, rejecting them, or withholding your love. Sexual abuse with a child is sexual penetration, sexual contact, attempted sexual penetration, or assault with intent to penetrate. With neglect, physical neglect is the failure to provide basic physical needs. Examples, basic needs that we need, everybody needs, and our job as parents or caregivers is to provide food, shelter, safety. These are considered basic needs that everybody needs. Neglect, physical neglect, would be failure to provide any of those things: withholding food or not having food available in the house, shelter, so in terms of a stable home environment, whether you have no home and are dealing with homelessness or just bouncing around from place to place. And then safety, things like leaving a young child home alone to care for themselves or other family members. Those are safety concerns which would fall into the category of physical neglect. With emotional neglect, it is the failure to tend to the child's emotional needs. Examples of that would be never showing emotion when interacting with the child, or withholding love and affection. Those are basic things that a child needs in order to grow and learn and develop. With educational neglect, it would be the failure of the parent or the caregiver to not have access to education, whether that be public schools, private schools, or even homeschooling. Whichever avenue you choose, you need to make sure that the child has the appropriate tools to succeed, as well as making sure they are attending school. Failure to do so can be considered educational neglect, whether it's just not enrolling them in these institutions or not fostering that learning environment and making it a priority to send your child to school as well. In the state of Michigan, there are specific child abuse laws that protect children against both abuse and neglect. The most recent one is the Child Protection Law Act of 1975. That is an act to require the reporting of child abuse and neglect by certain persons, to permit the reporting of child abuse and neglect by all persons, to provide for the protection of children who are abused or neglected, to authorize limited detainment in protective custody, to authorize medical examinations, to prescribe the powers and duties of the State Department of Social Services to prevent child abuse and neglect, to prescribe certain powers and duties of local law enforcement agencies, to safeguard and enhance the welfare of children and preserve family life, to provide for the appointment of legal counsel, to provide for the abrogation of privileged communications, to provide civil and criminal immunity for certain persons, to provide rules of evidence in certain cases, to provide for confidentiality of records, to provide for the expungement of certain records, to prescribe penalties, and to repeal certain acts and parts of acts. That is just a summary of the actual law, which is a multi-page document, and it breaks it down even further, and we will talk about that as well. But the biggest part of this is that we're going to be talking about today is it establishes mandated reporting and requires it by law for these mandated reporters to report any cases of both physical abuse and neglect. So who are our mandated reporters? Physicians, nurses, nurses' aides, psychologists, social workers, counselors, teachers, school administrators, law enforcement, adult daycare providers, child daycare providers, clergy, Michigan bank and credit union staff, hospital administrators, and medical examiners. As mandated reporters, when should we report? We need to report whenever there is a reasonable cause to report. It is not our job as the reporter to be responsible for investigating the case, not even for knowing the abuser's name or any legal definitions to know what actual legal ramifications or terms. That's not our job. Our job is to report any reasonably suspicious cases within 72 hours. Some quick facts about child abuse. At least 1 in 7 children experience abuse or neglect in the past year in the U.S. So the odds as an educator that you will come across a child in your classroom that is a victim of abuse or neglect is very, very high statistically and common, unfortunately. While not all families that are poverty-stricken are abusive or neglectful, there is a lot of statistics that show that most families that are experiencing poverty, they have a lot of stress in their families, and it could increase the risk for more abusive or neglectful situations for their children. Child abuse in those lower socioeconomic families are 5 times higher as a result. So it's just something to be mindful of as a mandated reporter, but not tunnel vision, because abuse and neglect can happen in any population. Again, teachers, school administrators, school counselors, they are all required by law to report child abuse and neglect. And when you are suspecting a case of abuse or neglect, you can either call the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services at the number listed, 855-444-3911, and call, and then you will speak to somebody and do a report over the telephone. However, there is an online form and submission that you can do as well through the Michigan Online Reporting System. Also, it's very, very important to remember that early intervention saves lives of these children. It is shown that abuse can a lot of times start small and over time escalate. So the longer these children are in abusive and neglectful environments, the abuse can escalate. The child can be more severely hurt over time. If we see anything as a mandated reporter that just doesn't sit right with your gut, if you see bumps, bruises that don't add up with the story, and that ever-changing story, or even neglect, if you see the child that's coming to school in the same clothes every single day, unwashed, no lunch for lunchtime, things like that, those are all things that would be something that we can do that is reportable, and to find them the resources that are available to help get them out of these situations, or sometimes, especially with neglect, get these families the help and services that they need that they don't even sometimes realize are available to them. How can we support students and staff through these challenging times? Teachers can support their students with just having that judgment-free mentality and welcoming demeanor. Children that are going to be comfortable in your classroom and they know that they can come to you and tell you will be more apt to open up to you and tell you things that maybe are happening both in school and at home. So you will be a light in their life and hopefully be somebody they can trust and help them through these difficult times that they may or may not be experiencing. Another good resource for both students and staff, a lot of schools have implemented school resource officers, which is somebody from our law enforcement community that is in our school system. They are also another mandated reporter, another set of eyes, or somebody if you are just have some concerns, you can bounce some ideas off of. But you still need to realize as a mandated reporter, just because you are speaking with a school resource officer, that still you need to officially file a complaint through the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. As far as supporting children as they're going through these things, there is a plethora of online resources for different educational books, pamphlets, or learning tools to help cope during these difficult times. However, just being a person that can listen and listen without judgment is huge. As far as from a staff member perspective, it's hard to see things like this, like abuse and neglect, especially with students that you may grow to be very, you love them over time, and that can weigh a lot on a person, both mentally and emotionally. There are some resources available for staff. The Child and Family Services locally of Saginaw, they provide counseling for staff members to help them through times that are very unsettling, and they can help get them help them with healing with different stressors that affects both their job performance and life satisfaction. The Tuscola County Child Advocacy Center is also another local resource for children. It's kind of a one-stop shop where they can go and tell their story and tell it one time. They can not have to tell 100 different people. They can go there and report their abuse or neglectful environments, and there is adequately trained staff where they will talk to them, and then they only have to do it once. They don't have to say it 100 times and relive it over and over again.